Issues receiving forms or navigating the software. Please let our team know and we will assist you. For the purposes of tonight's demonstration, you do not need to.
So psilocybin occurs naturally in almost 300 mushroom species. Psilocybin is a neurotransmitter, an amino acid. It resembles serotonin. Now we learn more about these different networks of the brain. Most of the time, most of our brain activity is happening in this default mode network. This is a graph mapping traffic between, this was actually on LSD, but mapping traffic between brain cells not on LSD and then on LSD. Same thing happens on psilocybin.
Content presented in Cheshire Corners is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult a legal professional if you have any questions or concerns about the content of this disclaimer, this series, or the legal implications surrounding psychedelic substances in your jurisdiction.
First, I just want to take a breath and thank Rita. Again, this space, they newly are licensed. And one of the things that's really special about Rita and this space is that they're just very open. And if you had an idea or a community that you wanted to have a space to try something, they're very supportive of a number of different groups in here. So I'm grateful to Rita and to her team for their openness and for just experimenting with us. And again, she's very interested in your feedback. So feel free to give it. So this next section is just going to be a little bit of education. And we have licensed facilitators here. We have people who haven't tried mushrooms before. We have kind of the whole range. So this will be very repetitive for some of you and something new for others. I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Tony Shawcross. I help organize the Colorado Psychedelic Practitioners Cohort. It's now about 750 current and aspiring psychedelic practitioners and facilitators. It's everything from psychiatrists and MDs. We have maybe a dozen or 2 dozen people with prescriptive authority that are in the cohort, and then probably a few hundred people that are just totally aspirational. But the goal of the cohort is people who want to maximize the mental health benefits of psychedelics for their communities, focusing specifically on the legal psychedelics in Colorado, which for anyone who doesn't know is mushrooms, ibogaine, DMT, and mescaline. And then we also do a lot of work around ketamine with the cohort and occasionally THC. So 6 drugs, I guess, that are legal, 4 of which were legalized with Proposition 122 and now Senate Bill 23290. So a little bit of background about mushrooms. So as far as we know, they've been used throughout human evolutionary history. If you read like Michael Pollan's book and stuff, there's some interesting theories about mushrooms like using us to propagate themselves. I'm not going to show this video about mushrooms coming to the West, but it essentially just tries to bridge how a white guy like me is standing here talking about mushrooms and how mushrooms kind of came from mostly like indigenous communities to the West. It was first, psilocybin was first isolated in 1959 by Abbie Hoffman. He was working for Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. They marketed it for psychedelic-assisted therapy in the 60s. Then they became illegal with the Controlled Substances Act in 1968, then resumed research around this landmark study from Johns Hopkins in 2006. And then there's been different state and municipal legalization and decriminalization that's been happening since then, since the early 2000s. So psilocybin occurs naturally in almost 300 mushroom species. Psilocybin is a neurotransmitter, an amino acid. It resembles serotonin. In a couple slides, I think we're going to show the actual molecule, and you'll see it actually really closely resembles serotonin. And so, it's not too big of a mystery why it interacts with your serotonin receptors in your brain. This 5-HT or serotonin 2A receptor seems to be like the primary space where psilocin interacts with your body. I don't know if we mentioned this, but psilocybin, for those who are interested or don't know, it has to be converted in your digestive system into psilocin. Psilocin is the psychoactive medicine, so that's why you can't smoke psilocybin or anything like that. There's some other impacts about what psilocybin does in the body or psilocin does in the body. amygdala, like fear center reactivity tends to be diminished after psilocybin experiences, causes a lot more activity in your brain, especially in areas that aren't normally active. And that's what these next few slides are about. So yeah, when I first went to college and was first studying psychology, we learned about like the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain and the prefrontal cortex. But now we learn more about these different networks of the brain. Most of the time, most of our brain activity is happening in this default mode network, which actually incorporates all three of those original parts of the brain. And the activity in the default mode network tends to be diminished when you're on different psychedelics, including psilocybin. This is a graph mapping traffic between, this was actually on LSD, but mapping traffic between brain cells not on LSD and then on LSD. Same thing happens on psilocybin. A lot of us know what a high dose experience is like. We're here to talk about low dose experiences, but in a high dose experience within about the first 20 minutes, onset can happen. Takes 20 to 40 minutes for psilocybin to be detectable in your blood. The peak effect is in this 1 to 3 hour window where you tend to be a little bit more extroverted. You shouldn't be operating any heavy machinery, and your peak blood psilocin concentration hits around 90 minutes. Then there's usually a bit of like a calming phase where you're a little bit more like introverted, and then around 6 hours returning to normal. And this can be adjusted slightly by different routes of administration, but for the most part, that's a high dose experience. And then there's a great thing from the National Institutes of Health where they pulled together all the studies that had been published so far around microdosing to try and aggregate all the data that has been found. Over 70 studies and publications from last year, and they weren't really able to find really clear evidence of efficacy. But obviously there are a lot of reports for it helping with antidepressant, with anxiety. There's someone that was helping with this event, but not here, that has had sleep issues solved with his microdosing that he hasn't been able to resolve with other medicines. So certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence. That compilation of studies from the National Institutes of Health said that it's not totally clear that microdosing benefits exceed placebo. Microdoses usually range from 50 milligrams to 200 milligrams of dried mushrooms. Some common experiences on mushrooms. Again, this is more with the high dose experiences. The idea with a low dose or microdose experience is that you only subtly, if at all, notice what's happening. Some long-term benefits have been reported around lasting increase in openness, decrease in substance cravings, increase in self-efficacy in relation to substance use disorders. A lot of us have heard about the neuroplasticity, like the ability to kind of form new habits when you use psychedelics. So that is a reason why a lot of people microdose. Rita mentioned this a little earlier, but setting, dose, intention, and integration are huge aspects of what makes any psychedelic experience good. Mindset, some of the best practices are just grounding, especially being attuned to body sensations, trying to surrender. I'm sure a lot of you know that if you're resisting a psychedelic experience, it's kind of one of the most like surefire ways to have a bad experience. Staying curious, following intention. You want to be in a setting with minimal interruptions, ideally with music that you love. The higher your dose, obviously, the more important that is. Again, microdose is 50 to 200 milligrams taken anywhere from twice a week up to 5 days a week, whereas a macrodose is usually 2 to 5 grams. These numbers start mattering less and less now. The last psilocybin cup that happened in Colorado, the winning mushroom that was most potent was more than 60 times more potent than the least. And even the least was submitted to win the most potent mushroom, so it's not like a weak mushroom. And it was more than 8 times stronger than the average mushroom submitted for the competition. So it's just worth noting that we're all used to talking about grams of dried mushrooms and how much we're taking, but I think we will be moving more and more to talk about this psilocybin dosage, since, we can have mushrooms that are 10-fold or 20-fold or 60-fold as potent as others, but certainly not just like grams of dried mushrooms. Right. Some adverse reactions, so it's not all good. Obviously, some people have increased anxiety or even panic, some dysphoria, depersonalization, a lack of like self-awareness, paranoia, agitation. There are some negative adverse reactions that are not uncommon with mushrooms, but it is in general considered one of the safest drugs you can take. So, LSD, also mushrooms, even DMT tends to be very safe. But this is a study that was comparing harm to others or harm to individuals out of every 1,000 uses. And so you can see mushrooms here far safer than like alcohol or even tobacco. So it is one of the safer drugs that there are. There's something that's been coming out just mainly in the last like 2 or 3 years, which is in addition to binding to this serotonin 2A receptor, Psilocin also binds to the serotonin 2B receptor. It doesn't seem to contribute to the psychoactive effect, but other drugs that also bind to this 5-HT2B receptor can cause that receptor also has some involvement in the regeneration of cells in your heart valve. So all of our cells, most of the cells in our body, regenerate over time, age out, and are replaced by new cells. And this 5-HT2B has something to do with it. And so a disclaimer that's been in my recent trainings, but wasn't in my first training, just says that other drugs, other medicines that activate this 5-HT2B, there's been no connection found between mushrooms and a valvular heart disease. But other drugs that activate the 5-HT2B receptor have been connected to malformation of your heart valves. And this drug fen-phen, which was a diet medication popular in like the 80s, after like 10 years of use, sometimes as high as like 60-70% of people that took that medicine were needing heart valve replacement. Most of the protocols don't recommend microdosing every day. Most of them recommend some downtime. And again, my recent trainings have been suggesting that you want more days where you aren't activating this 5-HT2B receptor than days where you are. So whether that's like 5 days on and 2 days off, and then a month off every couple months, or whether it's, 2 days on and 5 days off, or 3 days on and 4 days off. It's totally up to you, but I feel irresponsible not mentioning that possibility. So there's 2 other things that I want to share. And well, the first is the cohort has been doing something for almost 3 years now, where we have over 80 people that are doing journaling of their microdose so that we can, like if you go into shops, increasingly people are saying that Hedis envy or hillbilly or whatever are better for attention deficit, or others are better for depression. And so that's really what we're trying to discover. We have over 10,000 entries now where people are rating their mood and their focus, their creativity, their energy. And we're compiling all this data to see if different strains do seem to have different effects. This is a program that a couple volunteers at the cohort have been managing. Your intestinal mucosa breaks psilocybin down into psilocin. And then this is how close like the psilocin and the DMT molecule are. They're almost exactly the same. I forget what this group is, but I think it's a hydroxy group that's here. And then this is the serotonin molecule. So you can see that serotonin, DMT, and psilocin are very, very similar. You're just missing these 2 little groups here. So again, it's just as an educational thing, helps people kind of understand a bit more why this 5-HT2A receptor, the serotonin receptor, would be very active both in your brain with DMT and with psilocin. I don't know if that helps anybody but me. This is a slide from Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist. I will say I've done now 7 or 8 different psychedelic certification programs. And Ben Malcolm, we have no affiliation, but Ben Malcolm's trainings are by far the best, like bang for the buck of any training I've ever done. Also by far the most like scientific based on what is known about what's happening. He even admits, of course, we only know a small percentage of what's happening, but he focuses on the science of what is known. And so for those that are interested in this is just an intersynaptic, like the space between 2 brain cells. So presynaptic, postsynaptic, this is the synapse. Other drugs, like ecstasy or something, will mess with the packaging and release of serotonin. And so they have a lot more potential risk of like serotonin syndrome, or if you just serotonin reuptake of just like interacting with SSRIs or SNRIs. Mushrooms just introduces, in this case, psilocin molecules that very closely resemble your serotonin molecules, which are the blue molecules here. And and thus bind with the serotonin receptors, these 2A receptors. And then there's a slightly different psychedelic pathway and signaling for what happens in the brain cells when it's signaled. So again, none of this is this is a little bit just more educational. This isn't a normal, this isn't the kind of ceremony that will be happening here at Almadose, but we wanted to just provide some educational content as well.
Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to Cheshire Corners. Tell me what you think in the comments. And as always, don't get psyched out.